The Vikings were the greatest sailors the world had ever seen. Their ships could navigate the treacherous fjords of Scandinavia with ease. Their warriors had raided coastlines across northern Europe. Their merchants had traded goods from the frozen north to the warm Mediterranean. They feared neither storm nor enemy. They feared neither death nor the gods themselves. But there was one thing that terrified them, one thing that made even the bravest warrior pale with dread: the open ocean, the vast, empty, trackless western sea. And tonight you will understand why. To truly grasp the terror that the open ocean held for Viking sailors, you must first understand what made them so exceptional on the water. These were not primitive people bumbling about in crude boats. The Vikings had developed the most advanced naval technology of their era. Their longships were engineering marvels. Shallow draft hulls that could navigate rivers and beaches, flexible clinker-built construction that rode the waves rather than fighting them, square sails that could harness the wind with remarkable efficiency, oars that allowed precise maneuvering in any conditions. A Viking longship could cross the North Sea in favorable conditions. It could navigate the complex channels between thousands of Scandinavian islands. It could beach on any shore and be dragged overland between waterways. For coastal sailing, there was simply nothing better in the world. The sailors who manned these vessels were equally skilled. From childhood, Norse boys learned to read the water. They could predict weather by watching the clouds and feeling the wind. They could sense currents by the movement of their hull. They knew every constellation in the night sky and how they moved through the seasons. They understood tides and their relationship to the moon. They had developed sophisticated methods of dead reckoning that allowed them to estimate their position based on speed, time, and direction. Most importantly, they had an intimate knowledge of the coastlines. Every fjord had its landmarks. Every island had its distinctive shape. Every harbor had its approach channels marked in the memories of 100 generations. A skilled navigator could sail from Denmark to Norway in fog so thick he could not see his own bow, simply by feeling the currents and counting the waves. This was coastal navigation at its finest, and it was utterly useless on the open ocean. Here is what the Vikings understood that we often forget. Coastal navigation depends entirely on reference points. You know where you are because you can see something: a mountain peak, a distinctive rock formation, the mouth of a river, the shape of a headland. These landmarks tell you exactly where you are on a mental map built up over generations of experience. Take away those landmarks and you are blind. On the open ocean, there is nothing. No mountains rising in the distance. No islands breaking the horizon. No currents carrying the smell of land. Just water. Endless, featureless, identical water stretching in every direction to the edge of sight. And here is the terrifying truth. Without landmarks, a ship can sail in circles. Without reference points, even the best navigator cannot hold a straight course. The sun moves across the sky, so you cannot simply follow it. The stars wheel overhead, so they only help at night and only when you can see them. Currents push you sideways without any sensation of movement. Wind shifts constantly, and you may not even notice. A ship could sail for days thinking it was heading west, when in reality it was curving slowly south or north, or even back toward home. The crew would have no way of knowing until they either struck land or ran out of supplies. This was not a theoretical concern. It was a mathematical certainty. Without tools to measure longitude, without accurate clocks, without the compass that would not reach Europe for another 500 years, open ocean navigation was essentially impossible. You could leave home heading west and never know if you were still going west. You could sail for weeks and have no idea how far you had traveled. You could search for a destination that might be 10 miles away or 1,000 and have no way to tell the difference. For the Vikings, the open ocean was not just dangerous. It was a mathematical impossibility, a navigational nightmare, a problem that all their skill and courage could not solve. And yet, they knew that something was out there. This is where the terror truly began. Over the generations, many ships had attempted the western voyage. Desperate men, curious men, ambitious men who thought they could succeed where others had failed, criminals fleeing justice, exiles with nothing to lose, dreamers chasing legends of distant lands. They had set sail from the western shores of Scandinavia, pointed their prows toward the setting sun, and disappeared. Not one had ever returned. Not one survivor had ever washed ashore with tales of what lay beyond. Not one piece of wreckage had ever drifted back to tell the story of what had happened. They simply vanished, as if the ocean had swallowed them whole. In the great halls of Norway and Denmark, the old sailors told stories of these lost expeditions. There was the tale of Bjorn the Bold, who had gathered 12 ships and 300 men for his western voyage. He had been the finest navigator of his generation. He had promised to return within one summer with gold and glory. His ships had sailed beyond the horizon on a clear spring morning. They were never seen again. There was the story of the Jarl of Hedeby, who had sent his 3 sons westward with instructions to find new lands for settlement. Each son had commanded a ship filled with the best warriors in his father's household. They had carried enough supplies for a year. They had disappeared like morning mist. There was the legend of the witch queen of Uppsala, who had used her magical powers to locate a western land. She had described it in detail to her followers: green hills, flowing rivers, forests full of game. She had led an expedition of believers to find this paradise. Not one of them had ever been heard from again. These stories were not ancient myths. They were family histories. Every village had lost ships to the western sea. Every clan had ancestors who had vanished beyond the horizon. The open ocean did not just kill sailors, it erased them entirely, left no bodies to burn, no graves to visit, no certainty of what had happened. This was perhaps the worst part, the not knowing. Had they drowned in a sudden storm? Had they starved when their supplies ran out? Had they sailed in circles until madness took them? Had they found land but been unable to return? The families left behind could never know. They could never properly mourn. They were trapped forever in that terrible uncertainty that is worse than grief. And so the stories grew darker. When humans cannot explain tragedy, they create explanations. When they cannot understand death, they imagine causes. The tales that filled Norse longhouses on winter nights were not merely sad. They were terrifying. Many believed that monsters lived in the western waters, not the small creatures of the coast, the seals and whales that Vikings knew well. Something else entirely. Vast things that dwelt in the lightless depths, serpents so long that their bodies could encircle an island, krakens with tentacles that could drag a ship beneath the waves in seconds, creatures so ancient and so powerful that they regarded human sailors the way humans regarded insects. Sailors spoke of seeing shadows beneath their ships as they approached the edge of known waters, massive shapes moving in the deep. eyes the size of shields watching from below. They told of ships that had reported strange things before vanishing. Crews had described the water changing color, growing darker, growing colder. They had felt something moving beneath their hulls. They had heard sounds from the depths, sounds that no fish or whale could make. And then they had sailed on, and no one had ever seen them again. Perhaps the monsters had risen from below. Perhaps the Krakens had pulled them down to a cold, dark death in the crushing depths. Perhaps even now, the bones of Vikings lay scattered across the ocean floor, picked clean by creatures that never saw sunlight. Other tales spoke of something even worse than monsters. The edge of the world. The ancient Norse believed that the world was flat, that the ocean eventually ended. That beyond a certain point, the water simply fell away into an infinite void. Imagine sailing toward that edge. Imagine seeing the horizon ahead grow strange. Imagine realizing too late that the current was pulling you forward and you could not turn back. Imagine the moment when your ship tipped over the edge and began to fall, falling forever through darkness, falling toward nothing, your screams lost in the endless void. This was not metaphor to the Vikings. This was geography. They genuinely believed that the ocean had an edge and that anyone who sailed far enough would fall off the world. The survivors of such a fall, if any survived, the thought itself was madness. And then there were the gods. The Vikings worshipped many deities, but they understood that the gods were not always kind. The sea god Aegir ruled the ocean with his wife Ran. They were capricious beings. They could grant safe passage, or they could destroy fleets on a whim. Their daughters were the waves themselves, and they loved nothing more than dragging sailors down to their underwater hall. Perhaps the Western Ocean was sacred to them. Perhaps they had forbidden mortals from crossing it. Perhaps every ship that tried was simply claimed by divine wrath. The gods did not explain their actions. They did not negotiate. They simply acted, and mortals suffered the consequences. To sail west might be to sail into the territory of beings who did not want humans there. Beings with the power to ensure that no human ever returned. All of these terrors, the navigation problem, the vanished ships, the monsters, the edge of the world, the angry gods, combined into a single overwhelming truth in the Viking mind. The open ocean was death, not possible death, not probable death, certain death. No one who sailed beyond the sight of land came back. This was not superstition. It was observation. It was evidence accumulated over centuries. It was the collected wisdom of the greatest seafaring culture on Earth. And it was why the Earl of Kattegat had made Western voyages illegal. It was not cruelty. It was not cowardice. It was protection. Every ship that sailed west was a ship that would never return. Every crew that attempted the voyage was a crew that would never be seen again. Every family that lost members to that hopeless dream was a family weakened, a community diminished, a people made poorer by wasted ambition. The law against Western voyages was not oppression, it was mercy. It saved lives by preventing fools from throwing them away. It protected families from the pain of losing loved ones to an impossible dream. It kept the community strong by keeping its ships and sailors focused on achievable goals. The Earl understood something that dreamers often forget. Sometimes the impossible is impossible for a reason. Sometimes the barrier exists because what lies beyond is genuinely unreachable. Sometimes wisdom means accepting limits rather than dying to test them. This was the world that young Ragnar was born into. A world where the greatest sailors in history had declared one ocean unnavigable. A world where generations of evidence proved that Western voyages meant death. A world where law and custom and common sense all agreed. Do not sail into the unknown. Do not challenge the gods. Do not waste your life pursuing the impossible. And yet, young Ragnar stood on the cliffs above Kattegat, staring at that gray horizon, and he felt something that defied all this accumulated wisdom. He felt possibility, not certainty. He was not a fool. He knew the stories as well as anyone. He had lost distant relatives to the Western Sea. He understood the navigation problem intellectually. He respected the dangers, but standing there with the salt wind in his face and the endless gray stretching before him, he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong with the conventional wisdom. The ships that had vanished, had they really tried everything? The navigators who had failed, had they really understood the problem? The generations of sailors who had declared the voyage impossible, had they really been right? Or had they simply given up too soon? Ragnar did not know the answer, but he knew that he could not stop asking the question. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a tiny voice whispered that perhaps the answer existed. Perhaps there was a way. Perhaps someone just had to be stubborn enough, or desperate enough, or mad enough to find it. That same night, Ragnar found himself walking toward the edge of the village, toward a workshop that most people avoided, toward the one man in Kattegat who might understand his impossible dreams. Floki, the boat builder, was not like other men. Where others saw the world as it was, Floki saw the world as it could be. Where others accepted limitations, Floki treated them as puzzles to be solved. Where others feared the unknown, Floki was fascinated by it. He was working when Ragnar arrived. He was always working. His hands moved constantly, carving and shaping and fitting pieces of wood together in ways that seemed impossible until you saw the finished result. His workshop was chaos to the untrained eye, but Floki knew where every tool and every piece of timber could be found. Ragnar did not announce himself. He simply stood in the doorway and watched. Floki did not look up, but he knew someone was there. He always knew. "Tell me something," he said without pausing his work. "Why do birds fly south for winter?" Ragnar frowned. "Because it is warmer there." Floki's hands stopped. He looked up with those intense, kohl-rimmed eyes. "No, they fly south because they know south exists. They have never walked to the southern lands. They have never seen them from the ground. But somehow they know those lands are real and they know how to find them." "How?" Ragnar shook his head. "I do not know. Neither do I," Floki admitted. "But they do it. Every year. Thousands of them. Flying across the ocean to lands they have never seen. And none of them have maps. None of them have landmarks. None of them can read or count or calculate. They just know." He returned to his work, his strange smile spreading across his thin face. "The gods gave them a secret, Ragnar, a way to find what cannot be found, a method of navigation that does not require eyes or memory or reference points. And I have been wondering lately, what if the gods gave that same secret to men, we just forgot how to use it?" Ragnar felt something stir in his chest. "What do you mean?" Floki's grin widened. His eyes gleamed with that unsettling